Hello, everybody. Hi. We're going to be doing chapter 6 today, so I have my book here, so if you guys can grab your book as well, that would be great. We're going to start chapter 6 today, and you're going to have questions to answer after that. Okay? So here it goes. The Flying Coffin. As Japanese planes dove over Oahu, some 2,000 miles west, Marines were sitting in a tent on Wake Atoll eating pancakes. The tiny atoll, a strategically critical air base, was home to about 500 bored American servicemen, mostly Marines. Nothing interesting ever happened there, but that morning, as the Marines started on their pancakes, a siren began wailing. Soon, the sky was streaked with Japanese bombers, buildings were exploding, and a few startled men found themselves on the front in the Second World War. All over the Pacific that morning, the story was the same. In less than 2 hours over Pearl Harbor, Japan mauled America's Navy and killed more than 2,400 people. Almost simultaneously, it attacked Thailand, Shanghai, Malaya, the Philippines, Guam, Midway, and Wake. In one day of breathtaking violence, Japanese main onslaught had begun. In America, invasion was expected at any moment. Less than an hour after Japan bombed Hawaii, mines were laid in San Francisco Bay. In Washington, D.C., the civil defense minister looped around in a police car, sirens blaring, shouting "Calm" into a loudspeaker. At the White House, a butler heard the president speculating on what he'd do if Japanese forces advanced as far as Chicago. First Lady Eleanor Roosevelt wrote to her daughter, next page 50, to her daughter to flee the West Coast. In subsequent days, trenches were dug along California beaches, windows across America were draped in blackout curtains, and bridges, tunnels, and factories were put under guard. In Nebraska, citizens were taught to disable firebombs with garden hoses. Japan galloped over the globe, invading the Philippines, Guam, Burma, Borneo, Rabaul, Hong Kong, Singapore. But Wake wouldn't give in. The Japanese bombed and strafed it for days, then launched a massive invasion attempt. The little group of defenders shoved them back. It wasn't until December 23rd that Japan finally captured Wake and the men on it. For days, the captives were held on an airfield, singing Christmas carols to cheer themselves, as the Japanese made plans to execute them. Then plans were changed. Most captives were forced onto ships, bound for Japan and occupied China as prisoners of war. 98 men were kept on the Wake. The Japanese enslaved them. In August 1942, Louis graduated from flight school as an officer, a second lieutenant. He drove to Torrance to say goodbye to his family before heading into his final round of training, then to war. Before he left, his family gathered on their front steps for a last photograph. Louis put his arm around his mother, who was fighting back tears. His father rode with him to the train station, crowded with uniformed young men and crying parents. Embracing his father, Louis could feel him shaking. His train pulled away. Louis looked back. His father stood with his hand up, wavering smile on his face. Louis wondered if he'd ever see them again. And then if you see on the picture on page 51, there's a picture of him and his family. The train carried him to Ephrata, Washington, where an air base sat in a dry lake bed. The lake bed was determined to bury the base in blowing dirt, and it was succeeding. Men waded through drifts more than a foot deep. All the meals were gritty with sand, and ground crews, which had to replace 24 dirt-clogged aircraft engines in 21 days, had to spray oil on the taxiways to keep the dust down. Page 51. Louis was standing in the dust, sweating, when a man walked up and introduced himself. He was Russell Allen Phillips. He would be Louis' pilot. That's important. The son of an Indiana pastor, Phillips was small, built like a fire plug. A gentle, generous-hearted young man, he was so quiet he could be in a room for hours before anyone noticed him. He had one consuming passion. Back home, where everyone called him Alan, he met a girl from the church choir, C.C. Perry. She had a curvy figure, a buoyant personality, a quick mind, next page, and a family cat named Chopper. At prom in Terre Haute, Alan kissed C.C. He was a goner, and so was she. On Saturday night in November 1941, when he left for the Air Corps, Phillips spent 5 last minutes with Cece at the Indianapolis train station. When the fighting was over, he promised he'd make her his bride. In Ephrata, Louis and Phillips became best friends. Phillips floated along in Louis' chatty good humor. Louis liked Phillips' quiet, kind steadiness. He called Louis Zamp. Louis called him Phil. They never had an argument and were almost never apart. The rest of Phillips' bomber crew assembled. The top turret gunner and engineer was Stanley Philsberg. The other engineer was Clarence Douglas, who manned one of the 2 waist guns behind the wings. The navigator was nose gunner was Robert Mitchell. Frank Glassman was the belly gunner. So there is Russell Allen Phillips, and then there's the whole crew there. All right, you can turn the page. Ray Lambert was a tail gunner. The radio man and second waist gunner was Harry Brooks. The co-pilot was George Monzette Jr. Together, they made the crew number 8 in the 9-crew 372nd Bomb Squadron. All the men were bachelors, but Harry Brooks, like Phil, had a steady girl back home. Her name was Jeanette, and she and Harry had set their wedding date for May 8th, 1943. If anybody knows about World War II, it did not end then. It ended later. All the crew needed was a plane. Everyone was hoping to be assigned to a B-17, a handsome, fiercely armed, practically indestructible bomber. The plane no one wanted was a giant new plane, Consolidated Aircraft Corporation's B-24 Liberator. On paper, the B-24 was comparable to the B-17, but for one major edge, it could fly literally all day without refueling. To the men, though, it left much to be desired. Flat-faced and rectangular, it had looks only a nearsighted mother could love. Crews called it the Flying Brick and the Constipated Lumberer. Not such great names. The cockpit was oppressively cramped. Navigating the narrow catwalk could be difficult. One slip and you'd tumble into a bomb bay, which had fragile aluminum doors that would tear away with the weight of a falling man. The B-24 wheels had no steering, so when taxiing, the pilot had to coach the bomber along by powering one side's engine, then the other, and working to the left and right brakes, one of which was usually more sensitive than the other. The taxiways were a pageant of lurching planes, all of which eventually veered into places nowhere near where the pilots intended them to go, and from which they often had to be dug with shovels. Flying the B-24, one of the world's heaviest planes, was like wrestling a bear. Because pilots strong-armed the yoke, the control lever, next page, 56, the left hands, they were instantly recognizable when shirtless, because the muscles of their left arms dwarfed those on their right. The plane was so clumsy that it was hard to fly in tight formations without hitting other planes. It was also plagued with mechanical difficulties. If one of the 4 engines died, staying airborne was challenging. If 2 quit, it was an emergency. Early on, there were incidents in which B-24 tails fell off in midair, and the plane had a reputation for frailty, especially in the wings, which could snap off if stuck in combat. Some men thought it was a death trap. You may have to describe the B-24, so make sure you're paying attention. When the 372nd Squadron's planes flew in, Phil's crew walked out to look. Louis heard someone mutter, "It's the flying coffin." Wonder why they called it the flying coffin. For the next 3 months, the crew practically lived in the B-24. They flew in formation, fired at targets, and simulated combat runs. They buzzed so low over Iowa that the propellers kicked up a sandstorm, skinning the paint off the plane's belly and scurrying the legs of Pillsbury, sitting by the open tail hatch. Through it all, Louis perched in the glass-windowed greenhouse in the nose, bombing with superb proficiency. The squadron's prowess was soon well known. An angry farmer came calling after the 372nd's bombs flattened an outhouse. So there's Louis. There we go. There's Louis in training. And this is also him in training as well. Next page, page 58. We're almost done. Training transformed Louis' crew. They worked together with seamless efficiency, and in the grim business of bombs and bullets, they were the squadron's best crew. The warmest praise would go to Phil. B-24s were built for tail pilots, and through small-statured Phil, he had to sit on a cushion to get his feet in the pedals and his eyes over the control panel. He was, in Louis' words, a damn swell pilot. Dealing with adversity with calm, adaptive acceptance. The surprise of the pliant pilot, Louis would learn, was that in crisis, Philip was as brave as they come. The crew's B-24 had its own personality. It oozed fuel into the bomb bay, inspiring Phillipsburg's nervous habit of pacing around, sniffing the air. It loved venting deafening backfires. When nearing empty, the fuel gauges sometimes reported that the plane was magically gaining fuel, but for all of its quirks, the plane never failed the men. It was a noble thing, rugged and inexhaustible, and they loved it. They named it Superman. In October 1942, the men packed their bags. Training was over, and they were being sent to Oahu to war. That's in Hawaii, by the way. Phil was crestfallen. Cece was about to come to see him, and they had spoken of getting married. He'd missed her for 3 days. Before he left, Louis sent a package to his mother. In it were airmen's wings. Every morning, as she waited for her boy to return, Louise pinned the wings to her dress. Every night, she pinned them to her nightgown. That's important. Might be a question later. On November 2nd, Superman lifted off. Land slid away, and then there was nothing but the Pacific. Its bottom was already littered with downed warplanes and the ghosts of lost airmen. Every day of the long and ferocious war, more would join them. And that, my friends, is chapter 6 in Unbroken. So you can go ahead and do your Google Doc with your questions. There's going to be 2 columns for you to do. You're going to only pick one, though, from each column. So choose one question from each column and do this. You're going to answer a total of 2 questions. Of course, if you want to do more, that's up to you. Maybe I'll give you extra credit if you do all 4 of them, but you only have to do 2, one in each column. All right, if you have any questions, see me on Remind, see me on Google Classroom, and have a great day. Bye, guys.